Hello fellow sim racers, and welcome to my first look at Assetto Corsa Competizione. Clearly, this is one of the most eagerly anticipated sim racing releases of the year, so let's see if it lives up to the mountain of hype that it's been placed upon. As you're probably aware, Assetto Corsa Competizione has just released through the Steam Early Access program. What that means for sim racers is that right now ACC has only one playable car, the Lamborghini Hurucan, and one track, the Nurburgring Grand Prix circuit. It's also limited to certain single player modes, and there's no VR support in this build. To balance out those fairly weighty downsides, Kunos have reduced the price pretty significantly for those that join the Early Access program, well, early. And to aid in transparency, they've put together a comprehensive roadmap to let players know when updates are due and what to expect. Broadly speaking, each month there will be a new car, track and game mode, leading up to the full release in Q1 2019. I've put a link to the roadmap in the video description if you want to take a look at that a little more closely. Now I've got the boring but necessary chunk of context out of the way, let's jump right in and take a look at how Assetto Corsa Competizione drives. Kunos have always been great at keeping their customers up to speed about what they're doing. And in the run-up to the Assetto Corsa Competizione Early Access release, they've been pretty candid about what sim racers can expect when they jump into the game and start driving. It's fair to say, Kunos has promised a pretty significant improvement over the already accomplished physics engine in Assetto Corsa, and I can honestly say, they've knocked it out of the park. I'm going to cut right to the chase here. Based on a sample of, well, one car, Assetto Corsa Competizione is a decent step forward. So let's get into detail and start with every sim racer's pet topic, force feedback. Assetto Corsa was widely regarded to have the best force feedback in the business, and I have to agree. But that being said, newer cars from Raceroom and RF2 in particular have, in my opinion at least, been on a par with Assetto Corsa. So, with that in mind, I was a little surprised to find that Assetto Corsa Competizione didn't feel like too much of an improvement to start with. If anything, my initial impression of the force feedback suggested that it felt a bit woolly. But as I got to know the feel of the car better, it all started to make a bit more sense to me. While the previous title had very finely detailed granular feedback, ACC has a slightly smoother feel. But, and this is critical, once you learn to read the signs, you can really feel what the tyres are doing. I'm really impressed with just how much the force feedback system in ACC is able to communicate, and by how intuitive it all is. Kunos has made a lot of noise about the advancements they've made in simulating tyres and suspension, and you can really feel this through the force feedback. It's subtle, but it's there, and honestly, it's pretty magic. In this build, you can only alter the strength of the force feedback, but once controls are added to allow you to tweak the usual parameters, I've no doubt it will get better still. One of the much vaunted aspects of the updated physics model is that car setups should behave significantly more realistically in Assetto Corsa Competizione. In theory, that should mean it will be more difficult to exploit the game engine with some of the ridiculous setups you see floating around. You know the ones: implausible tyre pressures, bizarre suspension geometry, and crazy caster and toe angles. Now, at this stage, nobody's really had enough time with ACC to tell if this is the case or not, but it does feel like getting parts of the car out of their operating window really messes things up. Moreover, in their recent suspension blog, Kunos even suggested that they'd been able to successfully use real-world setups that were provided by Blancpain team engineers in Assetto Corsa Competizione, which is very impressive indeed. While we're on the subject of setups, the 3 stock setups for the Lambo are fairly decent. The safe setup's pretty understeery, and those that are quite aggressive with their wheels are going to absolutely hate it. That being said, it is nice and docile, and the front end can be brought into line with plenty of trail braking. I found that playing with the diff preload massively helped the car on turn-in and made the setup considerably more appealing. The aggressive setup is a bit more edgy, but it probably doesn't go far enough for a lot of users that like a loose car. And finally, the wet setup feels absolutely spot on when you're on a, well, wet track. Speaking of wet weather, there are no words to describe just how good driving on a wet track feels in Assetto Corsa Competizione. In my opinion, ACC is the first sim that manages to get both the look and feel of driving in wet weather absolutely spot on. Water pools in low-lying areas, rivers form, and the spray effects are absolutely sublime. But what's perhaps more impressive is the feel. You really do have to go searching out the grip. Sadly, the weather's limited to presets in this first build, so I can't yet comment on how well the dynamic weather model works. But I can't wait to see how a drying track evolves, or how water starts to build up in a previously dry session. To sum up, in terms of driving, the Hurucan feels like it has a lot of presence. This is something that RF2 is great at, making you feel like you're driving a heavy car, fast on a complex surface, and that's the feeling I get from ACC thus far. I'm going to try and keep this section brief because, to be frank, your eyes should be telling you everything you need to know about how Assetto Corsa Competizione looks. Yes, it's tear-jerkingly beautiful, and I don't think it's a hard sell to convince most of you that this is the best looking sim racing title available. But what a lot of you are concerned about is performance. With all this fancy lighting, the Unreal 4 engine, and Nvidia using the title as a show pony for its next-gen video cards, you'd be forgiven for thinking that ACC needs a real top-of-the-line PC to cope. But the minimum specs listed on Steam aren't anything of the sort. However, once VR gets added in Build 2, then we'll really see what kind of horsepower is needed to get the most out of Assetto Corsa Competizione. While ACC does look stunning, the real story here is the atmosphere. And I think we were all hoping for quite a big improvement in this department. Project Cars 2 absolutely set the benchmark, and even with an extra year of development time, it would have been easy for Kunos to fall short. However, they've done themselves proud. The atmospheric effects are very natural indeed. Sparks, glowing brakes and exhausts, mists, spray, flag-waving marshals, photographers, moving banners and spectators with smoke flares, you name it, they've nailed it. Internal shadows and reflections are brilliant, textures gloriously detailed, and anything that lights up just looks incredible as soon as the ambient light level drops. And that's all before I've mentioned anything about the stunning weather effects. I'm going to move on because, well, your eyes should be telling you everything you need to know. I don't think too many people will castigate me for suggesting that Assetto Corsa was generally a bit lacking in the sound department. And Kunos haven't really said all that much about sound in the build-up to the Assetto Corsa Competizione early access release. Thankfully, for ACC, the sound is much improved. The Hurucan isn't everybody's idea of a great sounding racing car, but I think there's real charm to the 5.2 litre V10, and externally it sounds fantastic. But with modern race cars, the onboard sound is often a bit messy, with diff whine, compressor noises, brake squeal and other non-engine sounds getting in the way of the bit we all want to hear. And in that regard, the onboard sound in ACC is impressively accurate in my opinion, if not exactly sexy. When compared to onboard clips of a Hurucan GT3 on YouTube, ACC is pretty much indistinguishable. So, there are a bunch of other bits that I want to talk about that don't neatly fit into other categories. So I'm just going to veer wildly from topic to topic like that peculiar uncle you only ever see every other Christmas. First of all, Kunos have to be commended for the way that they've updated their in-game assets. Given that a laser scan Nurburgring and the GT3 cars were already included in Assetto Corsa, you'd be forgiven for thinking that these would be pretty similar, but you'd be wrong. If the Nurburgring is indicative of the quality that we're to expect from all of the other tracks in ACC, then we're in for a treat. As far as I'm concerned, this is the standard by which other racing games' circuit assets will now be measured. And the same goes for the Hurucan. The Assetto Corsa version was no slouch, but this is just better, more refined, better textures, and that small matter of a much more sophisticated lighting engine. I'm going to look at this in a bit more detail in another video, so let's move on via a clumsy segue to talk about the AI. Racing against the computer in any racing sim is usually a pretty tiresome affair, and that was certainly the case in Assetto Corsa. The AI in ACC do seem to be quite a bit more sensible in the way they go about their racing, though I must admit they're not the fastest AI in the world, particularly in the wet. But I'm sure that can and will be tweaked by Kunos for release. Moving on, and a word about rankings and ratings. This is something that's going to make or break the online aspect of Assetto Corsa Competizione, and the limited introduction we get in the first build doesn't really give too much away about the more critical aspects. That being said, the track competency rating system that hangs out in the top right hand corner of the screen seems pretty decent to me. Unlike in other games where demonstrating that you know the track well is a frustrating side game, ACC does a pretty great job of working out if you were on the racing line, fast and stayed within track limits. It just works. And the system doesn't get in the way of what you're doing. I found I didn't really have to alter my driving to start ranking up my competency rating, other than to avoid the odd track limits violation by being too greedy with the curbs. I'm impressed. That being said, as you've seen throughout the video, there were a number of times where the game couldn't connect to the server and thus didn't update or calculate my competency rating. But I'll put that down to first night jitters. Finally, before I sum everything up, I should probably talk about bugs and limitations. This is a very early build of the game and some glitches are to be expected. First of all, my virus scanner kept deleting the exe file, which, while highly annoying, is no fault of the game. And I've encountered a few weird graphics problems, flickering textures, clipping objects and the like, but nothing too bothersome. The UI is much improved over the previous game, but again I encountered a few quirks and glitches that will likely disappear in later builds. And finally, it's worth pointing out that there doesn't appear to be proper triple monitor support just yet, and of course, likewise with VR. So, if I need to spell it out, Assetto Corsa Competizione looks and drives like a dream. Sure, there's a very limited pool of content to go on, and I fully admit that I'm working on the rash presumption that all of the content will be of a similar quality. But Kunos isn't new to this, they're a known quantity and, in my opinion, they always deliver. But that being said, ACC is being billed as an online racing game, and this build doesn't include any of that functionality. So, for me at least, it's too early to come to any sort of conclusions about the title. Moreover, it's much too early to make predictions about how it stacks up against its main competitor, iRacing. So, to sum up, all of the early signs are very positive indeed, and if Kunos manages to maintain this level of quality throughout the title, then I'm sure Assetto Corsa Competizione will be a massive hit. If you're still with me, then thanks for sticking around to the end. I've got several more ACC videos planned for release over the next few days, so if there's anything you want to see me address, then please let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then it would be great if you could hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and if you think the video will be helpful for others, then please consider sharing it. As always, thank you for donating your precious free time by watching. It is very much appreciated. So all that's left to say is goodbye, thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.